Welcome back, everyone. In a previous Retro Restore, you got to see an NES get taken apart and reshelled, and this time we're going to have this full Super Nintendo that is kind of gross-looking shell on here. The bottom looks fine, but I mean, that top is pretty rough shape. We are going to reshell this one. The replacement shell for it is this nice clear shell. And I do want to thank Vacuums and Video Games in Huber Heights, Ohio for supplying this hardware, the Super Nintendo and the shell. And I'll leave a link to them in the description, but they are a retro shop, and I mean, they do vacuum repair, but they also have the video game repair, video game console sales, and games and everything. That is actually the place where I purchased my TurboGrafx 16. So they have all sorts of harder to find things. Last time I was in there, they had Little Samson for the NES. They had Earthbound for the Super Nintendo. They have Neo Geo, Neo Geo Pocket, Sega Nomad. Just all sorts of cool stuff that you usually don't see at other places. So I'll leave a link in the description to their website. And if you're ever in the Dayton, Ohio area, then yeah, I recommend checking them out. They have great selections. So to take the Super Nintendo apart, what you're going to need is the 4.5mm game bit, or if you get one of the ones through iFixit, you can find it as the 4.6mm line head screwdriver. So we will go ahead and remove all these screws. Now if you are doing this quite a bit, I'd recommend getting one of these nice iFixit ones. They are a lot better quality than what I was previously using. I was previously using these really cheap ones from Amazon. They work well, but once you use them too much, they don't work well anymore. And then just note the case has 6 screws on here. There's 2 in the front, 2 in the back, and 2 kind of center back. Then with the screws removed, we can just lift this case right up. Now one thing to note here, this is one of the easier Super Nintendos to deal with. There are some where right here there's a huge block that is a kind of like a sound card type area. Just setting the top to the side, and then we're going to work on taking all this apart. So to get the eject button out, you just kind of flip this part up a little bit, pull that back, and then everything just comes right out right there. And then make sure you pick up the little spring from there. Then with that to the side, the next thing we're going to do is remove the power switch. And with touching the board, make sure you're grounded out. So for the power switch, there are just these 2 screws that we'll take out on here. The next thing we want to do is remove this part right here from the board. So I've rotated the board around. We want to just kind of grab that and lift it up. And then the whole power switch just comes right out. Then what we will do is remove these screws here to get this heat shield removed. With those screws removed, lift up on the back part of the heat shield to get it to slide out, and then you can pull that straight up. And then set that to the side too. Then we'll go ahead and finish removing the 2 screws on each side of the cartridge slot. Then we'll remove this screw, and a screw that is down in here. So with all the screws removed, do have to note something on here. There are 2 different screw sizes here. The easiest way to kind of remember this is the longer screws, if it's going through some sort of component onto the board, including like plastic there, or the metal with the plastic there, then it's going to be the longer screw. It'll be one of the shorter screws if it's just kind of connecting right down to the board. Then with all the screws removed, I mean, we could have done this in the beginning, or we can do this now. Right here where this connects into the system, just give it a light pull to disconnect that. You don't have to disconnect it, but we're going to be replacing the LED in there. We will remove this metal piece down here, and then undo the screw to remove this metal piece here. And then just set those metal pieces to the side. And then we have this pretty well cannibalized here, so we will set this to the side. Now, anytime you have a Super Nintendo apart, make sure to check out this piece here. It was pretty common to have that part break out of there, and if you ever run into that being broken out, you can order replacement parts. You can get them on Amazon or just any other places. They're usually about 12 or 13 bucks. And for taking that out, you have to actually undo this shield, undo screws, and make sure that this little chip here is undone and that you don't lose it. Make sure to put that back in before you put everything back in the shell. And then when you have to replace that, there are these two solder points. You'll have to remove the solder from those, drop this out, and then put the new one in and solder those back in. Then what we'll do from here, since it's going to be a clear shell it will be in, is make sure everything's cleaned off. We'll start with our trusty can of air. Make sure you use this in a well ventilated area. And then we will finish it up with 91% isopropyl alcohol. If you're using it, make sure you're not using anything less than 91%. And then we'll use Q-tips to get areas cleaned up with this. So then that's all dusted off, and now we'll look at it and see what needs to be cleaned. One thing I do want to do is remove this V from the metal. It's the isopropyl alcohol to do that. Usually right there in the front of the board it gets a little bit dusty, so you just want to make sure you give that a nice thorough cleaning. So board is looking pretty good now. That V actually left kind of like a little mark on there. All the coloring's cleaned up from it. But other than that, everything is looking pretty good on here now. And now we have the fun part on here. This is where the LED is located. So we need to get this part off of here and then remove the solder from there, pop the LED out, and put a new one in its place. And with doing any soldering, make sure you have some safety goggles with you. Also have an exhaust fan, so if you hear a fan going for a little bit, then that's just to keep the area safer to breathe. So what you'll want to do is feed this the rest of the way through so it doesn't get in the way of any of this stuff. And then you have these little spots on both sides on here that you need to squeeze to get it popped up from here. So we squeeze on there, got that one popped up, and now we'll squeeze on this side. And we got that part popped off. And the little diffuser thing fell, but make sure you put it to the side. You don't want to lose that. So we'll use our desoldering wick on here to get the LED out. Once again, it's these two right here on the other side of that. So we almost got it all removed with our first go. Sometimes it takes a couple tries just to make sure it's all gone. Now you can use flux if you want also. I usually just use desoldering wick on that and it works pretty well. To remove the old LED, you have to actually break away the surrounding because it's all wobbly in there now. It actually moves, but this plastic part is holding it in place with a lip. So you can use a Dremel or you can use some other types of tools that kind of help to get in there. Or if you're brave, there are a whole bunch of solder points on here. You can remove the soldering on each of them and then use these tabs to pop off the front cover and then just remember to solder them back in. But the way the diffuser fits in place here, it's actually not going to really look that bad if you have some extra spacing in there.
I'm not sure how well the audio is going to work from the garage, but figured I'd at least film this part. I did have to run out to Lowe's because though I have the drill parts for the Dremel, didn't have the cullet of the right size. We're going to be using the 1/32 size just to get enough taken out of there that we'll be able to do what we need to do. Yeah, I just recently upgraded to a Dremel from a drill, so we will see how this goes. This is my first time actually using it. I also apologize about the lighting here because the garage isn't really set up to do any recording. Okay, I think we have it knocked off pretty well, so let's see if we can get this thing out of here. I didn't bring my tweezers down here, so try to extract it with some scissors since the pliers weren't working. There we go. We have it all extracted.
And now we're back up here into the office. We're just going to do a nice quick clean on this board. Take some of our isopropyl alcohol. Clean the back part where the LED was. And then make sure we get everything in here, get all that dust out of there. Just in case, use this. And then just like is covered in the NES video, this right here is the resistor for the LED. So if you need to change it to like make it so the LED is not as bright, then that's the one you'd change. And then if you follow the resistor, you flip it over, and that goes as first point, so that is going to be the positive point, and then that one's the negative. So we'll take our new LED from here, and then place it down. The longest side is the positive, so that's what will go down into the positive hole. And then once that's in there, we will fold these over. Kind of hold it in place. Then it's soldering time, so the fan's going to be on again. I use the Rosen core solder, so I don't need to put any flux down on here. But if you use flux when you solder, that's fine, doesn't really matter. Make sure you clean off the soldering tip when you're done, keep it nice and clean. Then we take our little metal clippers and clip the ends off of these. Well, one of them just went flying somewhere. It never hurts giving it another nice little wipe down with some isopropyl alcohol. Still some dust in some of these areas, so we'll just get that all cleaned up. And that part looks good, so we'll put the little diffuser back on there and set it to the side for now. Then we'll just do a quick wipe down on this because it has just some crust from time on there. Then with that looking nice, we will feed this back through this top part. So the ribbon's back in there, and of course our diffuser fell out again. Put that back on there, and then snap this back in place. Now we're on the home stretch for getting everything back together. We'll just put the top of this case to the side. Everything it came with in here. So we're just going to take this plastic protective covering kind of off the sides and the back a little bit here. We're going to keep it on the bottom for now, just make sure dust and stuff stays off of that. Now one thing I'm pointing out, a lot of these cases do come with the plastic parts for all these that are clear. So when you have that in place like that, it looks kind of cooler. It looks kind of weird when this part's replaced with a clear piece, because then you have the other gray parts back there that don't really accent it that well. Before putting the board in there, we have this little metal piece we need to make sure makes it back in here. Now, a lot of times cases do come with screws, but this one did not, so we're going to have to make sure to reuse all the right screws. There we go, we have that one in place. And then we have this other metal one that just drops in back here. Then we can put our board in place. Then take the front part, slide that back in place. Make sure this gets plugged right back in. One thing to note, there are little tabs on here that will go into place on each side. That's how you know that's popped back in correctly. Now we'll just start putting screws back in place. Starting with these long screws that go in right by where the cartridge goes in. Then we'll spin this around and take care of the long screws that go on the back of the system. So we have one long one that goes in right here, long one that goes in on this other side, then a short one that goes in right here. And even though it would look kind of cool without having this on there, we need to make sure this shield goes into place. Mainly because when the eject thing is in there, it will actually hit against that. We don't want it hitting against the board. And the shield uses 2 of the small screws. Then we'll get our power button put back in place. Now this one right here does have little plastic tabs that come through on the smaller holes, and then the bigger holes are going to use the small screws on them. Then also make sure that the little power toggle gets plugged back into the board over here on this side. Then we'll get the eject button installed back in here. So on the spring there are 2 parts. There's a long side and a short side. And you want the long side going to the bottom of the board. And what you do is you take the eject part, have the metal bar fed through there. You need it like this, where this part is on the side that would be to the right of the board. And then line the spring up and get it inside that little notch that's right there on the side. Then let the metal bar go back through just a little bit, so there's some metal bar slack on this side. And then you get everything else aligned up, starting with the metal bar. Then grab some tweezers and pull that bottom part of the spring through to where it's supposed to go on the board. And then once that's all aligned, you can get this metal part, like pull back a little bit and get it fed down into this side over here. And then it flips down like that to hold it in place. And this is why you need that metal shield, just because that hits there. You don't want that hitting that board. If anyone has any easier way of getting this little spring and everything all lined up for the eject button, then leave a message in the comments, because I'm sure there are other ways that probably work easier. Okay, so we are done with the bottom part, so now we need to focus on getting the top put back together. What we want to do is undo all these things on the top. So we'll start with this front panel here. Undo these 3 screws on it. Just to note, these are going to be smaller screws, not bigger screws. Then after you have those 3 screws on the top of it done, then there are 2 screws right in the back that need to be taken off. Then flip this around, and then get these 2 screws that are on the back of the tray. So there is a spring up here. Before we take this the rest of the way apart, take some tweezers and unhook the spring that's attached to this gross looking hair. And the easiest way to do that, move the reset button forward and then grab the spring at that spot and then push the reset button back. Then once that's done, you can just lift all this up. Then we will put this piece to the side, because we'll just be taking a few parts from here, but we're not actually going to be using this piece for anything. Oops, the spring fell off. Well, that makes that part easier. Set the spring to the side if it falls off. So then flip the board over. This part should just come right off. Just move those forward, lift that up, and then that can kind of go to the side too. Then the back piece, you have these little tabs here. You just push those in and then it slides right out. And this little part pops out too. And all that can go to the side. And then for our buttons, you want to squeeze in on these little tabs to pop the buttons out. So we have our power button, then we can pop that assembly out and put it to the side. And we have our reset button, and we can pop that part out and put it to the side too. So then in the end, we have cannibalized the top part of our case, the very gross looking case. And any parts that you are reusing from the old one, make sure you get them all cleaned up and looking nice. Then what we will do is remove the plastic covering from this whole shell. which means we'll just have to be extra careful with where we set this shell. There's some plastic residue that I saw left on it, so we'll just... There. Just got rid of that plastic residue. Well, let's figure out which parts we want to put on here. No, for sure we want the purple power and reset buttons just because how cool those look. We'll get that plastic front piece on there. So we'll be using this clear back part, but just for the cool accenting, let's stick with the traditional color tray in here, or tray protector. So we got that in there, have to feed it up from the bottom, and then this goes over the top to hold this spring in place. Then with those in place, which this bottom part might fall out, so just kind of hold it there while you're getting the next parts ready. So this didn't have anything special for these two pieces, for the power and the reset, so we cleaned those up and are reusing these ones. So before you put this piece in, just remember, this is where the spring attaches, and that needs to go to the front. Because the other one will only fit in the one way, where that little tab can stick back that way, but this one, make sure that part is sticking to the front. Then we have this big plastic piece. We'll just put that on over this, and then put these screws back in place. And just a note, when you are putting these in, just put the screws in enough that they stay in place, but not enough that it's like completely tight. Because if you put them in too tight, it's going to start bending this back part up, and you don't want bent plastic. Then with those ones in enough, take your power switch and pop that back in place. And then the reset switch, pop that back in place. Then flip that back over and then work on the rest of the screws. There are the two that are on the bottom here and these two in the back. Once all of these are held in place, then tighten up the ones from the back first going forward. There we have all the screws set, so now we'll start doing the tightening of all of them. Then once all those are tightened in, make sure that your power button and reset button will slide correctly, and that this will pop and reset correctly. And then since those all work, the reset button will get its spring back in there. So just use some tweezers. Grab it from one end, just hook it in on this side, and then stretch it to hook it on here. And there we go. Reset plops back into place. And then time for the best part. Remove the rest of the plastic from the bottom part. Put the bottom down and set the top on top of it. May have been far away from the mic at that point, but hopefully you heard that. Then we flip it over and start putting the screws in. We have the two screws in the back, two screws in the front, and two screws on the side. Well, I guess it's more of the near the back of the system. So then there we go. We have our new shiny shelled Super Nintendo. Now the most important part is testing it out. Oops, while I was hooking it up, I realized we forgot this little extension cover on the bottom, so there we go. That looks a lot better. So I turned the lighting down so we can kind of see the cool LED, but I'll try out a game in here. Hey, it looks like it's working. So yeah, if you see the LED on there, notice it's a slow changing multicolored LED, so it'll be kind of cool. I mean, it's not too bright, and it actually does pretty well at lighting up the front part of the case there, so that's kind of cool. I'm not even paying attention to the game. But there we go, that's something you can do if you have an ugly shelled Super Nintendo. You can get a nice new clean looking shell for it and get it all replaced, get it all cleaned up and everything, and I just crash into that. You don't have to do the new LED, but I mean, it's kind of cool having something like that in there. So if you have any other customizations that you'd like to see in Super Nintendos or you've done before, or even better way to do this type of customization, let me know in the comments. Well, I hope this was helpful and entertaining, and if you have any questions, let me know in the comments. Please subscribe, leave a thumbs up. Once again, I want to thank Vacuums and Video Games for supplying the equipment for doing this, and it's definitely a fun thing to do. Thank you for watching. Have a nice day.